What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Monday, February 20th, 2023. I am your host, Sean Murphy, and today we got to recap the action-packed All-Star weekend for the Detroit Pistons, Jaden Ivey. He had a hell of a weekend, man. I mean, first of all, let's talk about and get this right out of the way. The Rising Stars Challenge was by far the best part of the weekend because everything else was almost a disaster. I mean, the three-point contest was entertaining as always. You can't really go wrong there. Jaden Ivey was really impressive in the skills challenge. Multiple people on Twitter were saying that he was the fastest player in the NBA, which Jaden Ivey very well might have a run for that title. I mean, specifically in the skills challenge in the first round when he had to speed down the court to beat the time of Team Antetokounmpo. Like, it was insanely impressive just to see the burst that he has and the competitive fire that he had throughout the weekend. I will say it was a bit of a bummer that on the team that he was on, which is the team that won the Rising Stars Challenge, which, by the way, 2 years in a row that a Pistons players won the Rising Stars Challenge. Obviously, last year, they won because of Cade Cunningham and the effort that he played with. And, and he went out and actually won the MVP award in the Rising Stars Challenge. But this year, it was Jose Alvarado that went out and got that done. And Jaden Ivey actually had the least run on his team, which was really weird, by the way, because the broadcast was highlighting Jaden Ivey and Paolo Banchero, and they were really putting an emphasis on like him as being a part of the Rising Stars. And so it was kind of weird that for some reason they just went with almost everybody else but him. I mean, maybe that's just like a fan's perspective. Obviously, they're all just there to have fun, and at the end of the day, I don't think they're trying to like intentionally exclude anybody, but at the same time, it's just optically weird to see a guy that, is so prominently highlighted in this challenge and highlighted in the weekend just not really get as much run in that regard. And then, the skills challenge, obviously we talked about his impressive burst. The skills challenge just has to change as a whole. I mean, I think having, team rooks is a really cool thing, allowing them to be a part of it. But I mean, just having like team Antetokounmpos and then like whichever team, is hosting the All-Star game that year, like cool, I guess. But like the old format used to actually be really cool. And this was like something, in my opinion, that wasn't broken. And I get that like the skills challenge is always kind of been a struggle because it's always kind of been the odd event out. It's always kind of been the event that everyone cares about the least as far as Saturday night goes. And I get that they're trying to find ways to freshen it up and make it new. But what I will say, the new format is absolutely atrocious. So they got to go back to the drawing board if they're going to try to repurpose the skills challenge, because whatever they have now doesn't require any actual form of skill. It's pretty disastrous. And then, another thing that was kind of a bummer from the weekend was Jalen Duren, of course, having to miss the Rising Stars Challenge. We did see, over the course of the last couple of games before the All-Star break, Jalen Duren was dealing with some injury issues, specifically with his left ankle. He rolled it in the game against Toronto, and then we saw it really linger and be an issue for him coming down the stretch in the All-Star break. So I think, the break came at a perfect time for the team as a whole, but especially for Jalen Duren, just because of the fact that he is such an important piece of the Pistons roster and everything that they have going on right now, but also in the future. So for him to be able to have that rest and, to freshen up before the team, starts playing again, I think that's only a good thing for him 100%. And I think, as a whole, I think, it's a weekend where you have to feel optimistic about where Detroit's going forward, because yes, you're still not being featured on Sunday night like you want to be, right? Like we haven't really had a Piston have a prominent role in that night in years. I mean, yes, you had Blake made it in the 2019 season. You had Andre make it, a few years ago as well. But it really has been since the 2006 or 2007 All-Star game when the Pistons had featured 4 of their starting 5, where they really had a significant part of the All-Star game festivities. And I don't think we're far off from seeing Detroit having a significant amount of players in that game. Because if you look at the landscape of what they have coming forward, I mean, this would have been the second year in a row that they would have had 3 players in the Rising Stars Challenge, which would have been the most of any team that had any players there. I mean, I know Franz Wagner was in it this year. I know Paulo Banchero was in it this year. I know Evan Mobley obviously was in there. You had Jalen Green. You had Scotty Barnes. Yeah, you had the usual suspects, right? But at the same time, I think, if Cade was available, he definitely would have been in that game. He definitely would have had something to say about going out for getting that second MVP award. And there was even some pretty cool like press and availability stuff as well. Just seeing the relationship Jaden Ivey has with Cade Cunningham. Like some of the Rising Stars were asked like if they were to like have to like draft an All-Star, who would be their first pick. And Jaden Ivey was like, can it be a future All-Star? Because it's Cade Cunningham. And the fact that they have that type of dynamic and relationship and brotherhood off the court only speaks to good things for what their chemistry can be on the court going forward. Because in order for that to work, first you have to want it to work, and you have to have the desire to work, but also you have to have that understanding of each other as human beings and individuals. And even though they're not getting that run together on the court, which is really the most important thing that you can get in the most important type of chemistry that you can get, especially going into next season when you do want to start winning more games, that doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to have this summer. That doesn't mean they're not going to be able to have practices. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to, that they're not talking each and every game about every single scenario. So the fact that they have that type of relationship is something that, quite frankly, I'm glad to see. I'm optimistic about, but also just the fact that overall, I mean, even though the Pistons, again, weren't super highlighted on Sunday night, they still made some noise and made a statement and showed their presence throughout the weekend as well, which is something we haven't been able to say about the team in a long time. Now, the other part that stood out for me in the weekend as well was watching Scoot Henderson play in the Rising Stars Challenge as well, and just being able to see him throughout the weekend too. I mean, let's be honest, man. Scoot Henderson is special. And if the Pistons are in a position where, they have to decide on what they're going to do, if they're not going to be able to draft Victor Wembanyama, if they have the second or third pick, they're going to be in a very awkward spot. But at the same time, what a problem to have, man, because Scoot is going to be special. I mean, the kid is insanely athletic. He has bounce. He's super athletic, has a really good head on his shoulders. And it was really interesting, too, because he was asked during press and media availability about what types of players he wants to play with when he gets to the NBA. And the 2 players that he named that he would like to play with are Chris Paul and Ja Morant. And the reason why I find those comparisons really interesting, or why I find those players really interesting, is because the Pistons have 2 players that are like Chris Paul and Ja Morant. I mean, if you look at Cade Cunningham's game, he's essentially a 6'6", 6'7" Chris Paul. And Jaden Ivey has so many Ja Morant flashes. So you talk about, I want to play with guys like Chris Paul and Ja Morant. Well, Detroit has guys like Chris Paul and Ja Morant. Is that some subliminal messaging? Am I maybe reading into it a little bit too much? I don't know. But just saying, like, I don't know, man. Like, the idea of Scoot Henderson in a Detroit Pistons uniform, I know it doesn't make much sense on paper, but it's one of those things where you take the talent and you figure it out later. I mean, especially in the modern NBA. But at the same time, that just talks about the stories and the headlines and the things that we're going to be talking about coming down the stretch of the season, and some of the awkward things that Troy Weaver will be facing once the lottery, concludes. Like, once Detroit knows where they will stand, it's going to have a lot of things that will ultimately, and consequences that will ultimately face the rest of the team. And I think you talk about, in particular, if the Pistons do land that number 2 overall spot and they are in a position where they'd have to, where the number 1 guys on the board would be a Scoot Henderson or one of the Thompson twins who are really good ball handlers. I mean, sure, the Pistons could draft Brandon Miller at 2nd overall as well, and he looks like he's going to be a really solid player. But at the same time, do you want to make the mistake of drafting Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson? I mean, that's the $1 million question right there. Do you think Brandon Miller is close enough to the talent level of a Scoot Henderson? And listen, I know I've seen comparisons of Brandon. I know I've seen some people compare Brandon Miller to Kevin Durant. I'm like, no. Let's just stop right there. We're not doing that. We're not comparing any lanky, wings who can shoot the ball to Kevin Durant. That's not how this works. We need to allow Brandon Miller to grow and evolve as a player. We need to let him actually show what he could do. Yeah, what Alabama's doing right now is insanely impressive. How dominant they are and what they're doing in the SEC, unbelievable. But at the same time, we still have to allow these players to grow and evolve. And yeah, even though the expectations are even lofty for guys like Wemby and even guys like Scoot, it's just one of those things where, I mean, Kevin Durant, come on. But Troy Weaver ultimately will be the one to make that call. He's going to, if he gets the number 1 overall pick, that decision's going to be very easy for him. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's a good problem to have because the Pistons are going to have some insane talent coming into this locker room over the offseason, whether it's through the draft, but also, through the money that they have available through free agency and potential trades and acquisitions that they can make as well. And, they're still going to be able to, experiment with the Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren movement down the stretch of the season as well. We're going to be able to see more of what James Wiseman can do with extended minutes and, opportunity to actually, experiment with his game and make mistakes and get better. We saw in the Boston game, especially on the offensive end, there's some flashes of some really good things. And even on the defensive end, when he got robbed of some blocks, I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. So ultimately, the Pistons start back up on the 23rd. I'm really excited to see that game and to see him back in action. I would love to know what your thoughts are coming out of the All-Star break and going into the rest of the season. What do you want to see from the Pistons? Let me know in the comment section down below. But that is going to do it for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you subscribe.